started so that we don't hold up Sean too much. Thank you all so much for coming tonight for this very special performance. Sean Gaskell plays traditional songs on the Kora, a 21-string harp that he learned how to play throughout the course of multiple visits to its homeland in Gambia, West Africa. Gaskell has studied extensively under the instruction of Malamini Dubarti and Moriba Kuyati, both of Brikama, Gambia. He has been featured at a number of music festivals in the U.S., Gambia, and Senegal. Today he joins us in the midst of his Northeast tour that he began on April 2nd, that has taken him through Western Mass to Peabody, and then after this to a stop on the Cape, and then down to Long Island. He's a native of Asheville, North Carolina, by the way, so we're very lucky to stop by. Sean has brought some CDs with him, which can be purchased in the back for $10, and he welcomes some questions towards the end of the program as well. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thanks for coming out to the library. My name's Sean, and this is the Kora. And between some of the songs, I'll talk about some of the background and the history of it and how I got into it. But I'm going to start with a song that I wrote. This one's called Somanda. And Somanda is a Mandinka word, and the Mandinka people are to whom the Kora belongs. Somanda means morning, the time of day. And I wrote this song over the course of many mornings about 4 years ago now, when I was getting up quite early. And that was to be doing trail maintenance and construction work in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, which is about an hour away from where I live. Thank you. This one is called Kora. This song was composed in the early 1930s on the accordion, of all instruments, in the country of Guinea, West Africa. It means peace, and that's what the words to the song mean. They're sung in Mandinka, as is most of the singing that you hear with these songs. There are a few exceptions, one of which you'll get to experience and partake in a little bit later. Kora. This one's called Alalake. It's a traditional song from Gambia. It dates back to the early 1800s. Some people say it means God has done good work. Others say, generically speaking, when good work has been done, it should be celebrated and rewarded. Alalake. Thank you. So the kora, it's one of three instruments that are native to the Mandinka people, and of the three, it's the youngest, coming from about 300 years ago. And as you can see, there's quite a few things that go into making one. So down here at the bottom is a calabash. It's a gourd that grows in the ground the same way that a pumpkin does. To use it for the kora, they cut it in half and take all the seeds and everything else out, and it dries in the sun for a few weeks. They stretch a wet animal skin over the open half, and it gets nailed to the backside with upholstery tacks. That animal skin is usually a cow skin. This one's actually an elk skin. This kora was made in the U.S. about 7 years ago now, 6-7 years. The whole kora was built by an elk farmer in rural southern Oregon. And so I'm going to talk about some of the differences between the custom-made kora versus the traditional kora here in a little bit. But once that wet animal skin is nailed on, then 3 holes have to get cut into the calabash. And 2 of those are so that the neck that I'm holding on to can slide all the way through the calabash. And you can see the bottom of it right down here. And then the 3rd hole is cut so that the sound can come out. And everything is held together by the tension of the strings, both the white anchor strings down here, but also the clear strings that I'm plucking. Before any of the strings go on, this iron ring has to go through the bottom of the neck. And the easiest way to get that through would just be to take a drill and to pop a hole through. But most kora makers in Gambia that I knew did not own a drill. So what they would do is they would have to heat that ring up in a fire for maybe 5 or 10 minutes to get it really nice and searing hot. And they'd put a glove on a hand and they'd hold that ring up against the wood while they took a hammer with the other and started pounding it into the wood to start chiseling away little bits of the wood as they went along. And they'd have to repeat the process of heating and hammering maybe 3 or 4 times until you had a complete hole. And once you did, you'd have to secure the ring in place. To do so, most people would take nylon rope and wrap it through the ring and then around the back side of the neck in more or less of a figure-8 pattern. Some people would take it to a metalsmith and then they would cut out a spiral thread. They would weld it out, and then you'd put a nut around the other end. You'd screw a nut onto that threaded end on the back side of the neck. Anchor strings would go on first. The plucking strings get tied off to those, and they come up to this bridge here. The bridge is not fixed to the instrument, so like a banjo, if I were to loosen all the strings, the bridge would just pop off. And then the strings get tied off to the tuning pegs that you see here. And it's tuned very similar to a guitar. You just twist the pegs and the pitch changes. Some of the main differences between this and the traditional kora off to my left are the skin, the type of skin that's used here, the wood, all of it, the strings, and the tuning system. So with this kora, they're using harp strings. They've been specially ordered from a harp store up in Vermont. The wood with the neck, it's paduk, which is a southern African hardwood. The tuning pegs, handlebars, bridge, and the crosspiece are all Honduras mahogany, and everything's been finished and stained and whatnot. With the traditional kora, off to my left, it uses the traditional cow skin. I've never seen anything more than an elk skin or a cow skin used. With the wood, they're using keno, K-E-N-O. It's a tree that's native to the region where the kora is from. The strings are fishing line. They've been using fishing line since the early 1920s. Before that, they used antelope hide, the skin of an antelope. And I've never seen or heard an antelope hide kora played before. Supposedly, there's only one that still exists, and it's in the Royal Museum of London in England. And they dated it back to like 1810, something around there. The tuning system, they use these rings here, and they're called conso. Conso is cowhide, just like this. So they have to weave each of the conso around the neck before the neck gets attached to the instrument, and they have to dry for a couple of weeks. And then once you put the neck through, each string gets wrapped around a conso 4 or 5 times and then tied off. And then from there, you can tune. So if you want to tune the pitch of the strings higher, you have to move each of the conso up the neck, or vice versa. To lower them, the conso has to come down. And if you're trying to tune upwards, you have to put downward force on the calabash, either with your elbows or your legs. The tension rests on the back side of the conso, So you have to push up on the front with your thumbs to release that tension, which allows you to move them a little bit more freely at that point. So it's a lot more challenging than the custom-made Kora. This song is called Ninkube Keledi, and it's a traditional song that I learned on my most recent trip to Gambia in February. I just got back. The song basically means when you meet someone for the first time, you think very well of them. This one's a Malian love song called Nankumanjan. Thank you. So there are people within Mandinka society known as griots, spelled Griots. There's what some might consider to be a class system in Mandinka society. And so the griots, it's their responsibility to tell people about their history, dating all the way back to the Mandinka Empire founding, which was almost 800 years ago in the mid-13th century. And the Kora is most culturally significant to the griots because they use it as one of the primary mediums for telling you about their history through these songs that you'll hear. So within the traditional repertoire, you will hear songs that are named after people who helped to fight battles to expand the empire from Mali into Senegal, Gambia, which is where I studied, Guinea, and Guinea-Bissau. There are songs about political leaders from all ranks. There are songs about specific places, times, people, and there are folk songs in addition to the traditional repertoire. So people write their own songs on the Kora, just like people here do as well. When I was in Gambia, I would see the Kora being played at 3 types of events for the most part. One was very casual, but the other 2 were very formal. The casual event might happen once or twice a month inside of the griot family's compound. A compound is where an entire extended family of people live, anywhere between 30 and 40 people in number. And it's not just the griots who lived this way, it was pretty much everyone that I knew in Gambia. And each immediate family would have a series of rooms that were connected to each other, usually on the exterior walls of the concrete walled compound. And the central area was pretty open. It was sort of like a courtyard, and this is where a lot of the music would take place. And you would usually see more than just a kora being played at one of these events. In fact, it was rare to see a solo kora player. They were usually accompanied by other instruments, maybe singers, and perhaps both. If it was going to be accompanied by another instrument, sometimes it would be accompanied by either the ngoni or the balafon. Those are the other two native Mandinka instruments. One is a stringed instrument that you play more like a guitar, and the other is a wooden xylophone that you play with a mallet in each hand. Typically, men would be the ones playing the instruments and women would sing. Within the last 15 to 20 years, you're starting to see that more women are playing the instruments with less cultural resistance than there used to be. Just as you're seeing people that were not born into griot families play these for the same reasons. The two more formal events would be weddings and naming ceremonies. And a naming ceremony would take place exactly a week after a child was born. It was a three-part event in which the first part is where they would name the child. The second part would be a huge feast, and then the third part is where the music would take place. And the naming would take maybe an hour and a half. That first segment would be held inside of the mother's childhood home, the mother of the child, that is. She may be living with her husband's family at that point, but it might also be the other way around. The husband may have moved in with her extended family. And the naming would be led by a griot who is on a bullhorn, usually, saying praise for the baby and for the family, just bringing up well wishes and good fortune. And oftentimes another griot would stand next to him and tell him what to say through the bullhorn. And at other times, this person would walk around the audience and collect cash donations to then give to the parents of the child to help support them. The naming was a very communal process because you would look around and you'd see groups of people chatting amongst themselves, and sometimes one or two people from each of these groups would come up and just go back and forth with the griots for a little while. And then the name would be announced over the bullhorn at some point, and that would lead into the feast. And the feast would include sometimes cooked goat meat, sometimes chicken, sometimes fish, cooked with vegetables, served over cooked rice, in large bowls that 4 or 5 or 6 people would sit around and eat from together. And the eating was conventionally done with the right hand. You could use forks. The way that the food was prepared, it was actually almost easier to use the hand because if they were going to be using fish, it would be cooked whole but not separated from anything, so everything would still be attached. And the cabbage would be cut in half and steamed, so you just pull off a leaf of cabbage and mix it in with some fish and some of their absolutely delicious sauces. And that's how you do it. The music was sort of like the after party at both weddings and naming ceremonies, and it would go late into the nights, sometimes 1 or 2 in the morning, and you would see maybe 100 to 300 people at one of these. And usually the first 2 segments of the naming ceremony were reserved just for the family, but when the music came along, anyone could attend. Like if you're just walking by the street and the music was going on, you could just come in and hang out and enjoy the music. And at these events, the kora would be featured as the lead instrument of a band with other instruments that you all are familiar with, like electric guitars and bass, electric bass, a drum set that you would see in a rock band, keyboards, and all of these would be plugged into a huge 64-channel soundboard. And why they didn't just use one that only had 8 channels beats me, because there was only 6 to 7 people in the band. But they got a lot of power out of it. And so they ran the sound into 2 huge amplifiers, and the sound would blast out to the audience like it was a rock concert, and you could literally hear it from a half mile away in some cases. And it was very danceable music, so people would get up and dance quite frequently for it. And it's how these events are how the bands playing at them made their living. And there's a certain process they would have to go through to engage the audience to want to pay them. And I'll talk about that after this next song. This one is called Masane Sise. And this is a very tragic story. Masane Sise was very prominent in his village in central Gambia, sometime in the late 1700s. He was set to be wed to his fiancée Fatu, and everything was going well leading up to the event. Everyone showed up, the families were there, and then all of a sudden he passed away, and no one exactly knows why. So the words to this one, it's mourning the loss of Masani Sise, but also singing about a well-lived life. Thank you. So at one of these events, the wedding or the naming ceremony, you would see the band set off to the corner or the side of wherever the space was. Sometimes the space was the home of a family member of either the bride or the groom or the newborn child, depending on the events. If the family thought there were going to be enough people attending, a lot of people I should say, sometimes they would rent out the soccer field of the local elementary school. And it got pretty sandy and dusty. It wasn't grass or anything, it was just dirt. And so to engage the audience, you would see the band set out a 5-gallon tub right in front of them, and it would be on the same ground level as them and the audience. And this would usually overflow at some point with cash during the evening. And so you would see maybe the second or the third song in, the band, the lead Kora player would step up to the vocal microphone and he would start singing praise for whoever the song was for that they were playing. And he'd do that for a while, maybe 5 minutes or so, and then he'd back off and you just hear the melody resume for a bit. These songs would sometimes go on for 10 minutes up to a half an hour. So they're presented a lot different than music is typically presented here. So when he came back in to start singing, the Kora player, you would see maybe 4 or 5 people from the audience stand up, and they'd be the first ones to walk up and put money into the tub, and they'd usually just hang out there for a bit and dance and enjoy themselves. So these people who came up, the first ones, they were usually direct descendants of the very person who the song was about, and they were coming up to pay their respect to the griot for calling out their family name. The Kora player may know the fact that these people are related, but it might also be a blind call. Let's imagine the song's name is Bob Jones. All right, so when the Kora player sings, he may be saying something to the effect of, anyone from Bob Jones's family, back in the year 1423, here are these 3 things that Bob did that was so great for our people. And I'd like to talk about this for the next few minutes. And if any of you are out there that are related to this person or know someone who is, please come up and show your form of respect in the form of a cash payment. And the reason that an exchange like that happens in Mandinka society is because the griots value the fact, the Mandinka people value the fact that the griots are the safekeepers of the history. A griot can literally walk up to someone, ask for their surname, and then tell them 800 years worth of their family history. So it means a great deal that they can do that, and the people feel that they should be financially supported for being able to do so. Those first people who came up, they'd go back out to the audience, and a little while later, they'd bring up some of their friends, and then from that point, there'd just be a streamline of people coming up, putting money into the tub, and just dancing and having an absolutely wonderful time. Once the tub started overflowing, someone would have to come up, usually someone who knew one of the folks in the band, and they'd throw both of their fists into the tub and grab out whatever they could, and they might walk over to the Kora player and stuff some of that cash into the sound hole of the calabash of the Kora. They may come back and grab some more, and if maybe the guitar player or the drummer was wearing a hat, they'd open up the hat and put some in there and stuff it back onto his head, or maybe even put it into the shirt pocket if he had one, just so that there was more room for people to keep coming up and putting money. So it's a lot different of an experience than you're witnessing tonight. This song I'd like to get you all involved in. It's called Tira Makan, and it's one of the oldest songs in the entire Mandinka repertoire. It dates back to the mid-13th century. And Tira Makan was very important because he helped coordinate the efforts for the Mandinka armies to move out of Mali and into the rest of West Africa. He did this with the help of the emperor, the very first emperor of the empire, known as Sunjata. So the words to this song that we're going to sing together talk about Tira Makan's experience on the front lines of the battlefields. And the words basically mean the enemy tried to pierce Tira Makan with a sword, but they did not succeed. And it's a call and response. And so the response line that I want you to sing in the Bambara language, which is native to the Bamana people in Mali, the 3 words translated mean the enemy did not succeed at piercing Tira Makan. So please say each of the 3 Bambara words after me that mean that. Please say Susa,
Susa,
Rejo,
Rejo,
Tira Makan.
Tira Makan.
Susa,
Rejo,
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 Tira Makan.
Tira Makan.
Good. Don't worry if you didn't get it the first time, because we're going to sing it as the warm-up as well. So in fact, I'm going to sing those words to you, and I want you to sing them right back to me. It goes, Susare jo tira makan. Your turn. Susare jo tira makan. My turn. Susare jo tira makan. Your turn.
Susare jo tira makan.
Susare jo tira makan. A little louder.
Susare jo tira makan.
Good. Good. So the call lines. The first one that I'll say means the enemy tried to pierce Tira Makan with a sword, and you're saying Susa Rejo Tira Makan. They did not succeed. And then I will say the mother and father of Tira Makan. They give him their moral support and protection while he's out fighting the battles. And you'll be saying the same thing each and every time. So let's try it. It'll go a little faster. It goes. Amuru yebang Tira Makan. Susare jo tira makan, kelke muru yebang tira makan. Susare jo tira makan, iba tira makan, ifa tira makan. Susare jo tira makan ifa tira makan iba tira makan. Susare jo tira makan. Good. Great. So you got that part. So I think we'll mix it in with the Kora next for tira makan. Susare jo tira makan, kelke mungi bang tira makan. Susare jo tira makan, iba tira makan, iba tira makan. Susare jo tira makan, iba tira makan, iba tira makan. Susare jo tira makan. Susare jo tira makan, kelke mungi bang tira makan. Susare jo tira makan, iba tira makan, iba tira makan. Susare jo tira makan, iba tira makan, iba tira makan. Susare jo tira makan. Susare jo tira makan, kelke mungi bang tira makan. Susare jo tira makan, iba tira makan, iba tira makan. Susare jo tira makan, iba tira makan, iba tira makan. Susare jo tira makan. Thank you. And thank you for taking part. I always enjoy getting the audience involved. So hope you like that. This is another one that I wrote, and it's called Smoky Mountain Sunset. I wrote this after a backpacking trip with my wife into the Great Smoky Mountains National Park just last fall, so about 6 months ago now. Smoky Mountain Sunset. So this time, I'd like to go ahead and open up the floor for any questions that you might have. Yes?
How did you come to study these instruments?
I stumbled across the Kora back in 2006 because my dad invited me to a folk festival in my hometown of Olympia, Washington, about an hour south of Seattle. And there was a Kora player performing that night, an American one, albeit. His name's Kane Mathis. And I just fell in love with the instrument that night. And so, yeah, absolutely. So I talked with Kane, and I figured out that he was willing to teach me. And that was the easiest of my two tasks that night. The second and far more challenging task was trying to figure out how to come by one of these. Kane didn't have an extra one, so he put me in touch with a guy in Dallas who knew of a guy up in Ellsworth, Maine, who had just gotten back from Gambia. And this person had an extra one, and it happened to be this very one right here. So I took this up to Kane and had lessons with him for about a year and a half, maybe once a month or so. And that led up to my first of the 3 trips to Gambia. The 2008 trip was for 3.5 months. 2012 trip was for 6 weeks, and this last trip was for 4 weeks. For my first 2 visits, I had 2 teachers. One of them passed away a year after my second visit, and I had the same one for the 3rd visit as well. It was a father-son combination. the late Malami Jabate and his adopted son Moriba Kuyate. And they not only taught me how to play Kora, they took care of me like I was one of their own. They picked me up at the airport, took me into their home, fed me, and they owe a great deal to them for sharing with you what I am today. So, yeah.
How do you decide which one to use for which song?
I'm still figuring it out because I just started performing with this one. Actually, I take that back. I was performing with this one before I had this guy, but that was 6 years ago, and I'm just starting to bring this in just because there are certain things with the traditional chord that you just can't replicate with the custom-built one. As far as figuring songs out, at this point, I've just kind of had them tuned a little bit differently, so I'm not having to tune as much during the show. So that's kind of been the deciding factor up to this point. Yeah.
Is the music written in the same way as it is here?
It's not. No, none of the music is written down. So it's all learned just by listening and kind of feeling it out. And the teachers really encourage you to give it your own flavor. So they may teach you the melody, but they want you to do your own improvisation. They really highly encourage that. So it's very jazz oriented in that sense. Yeah.
Two questions?
Sure.
Did you play other instruments before?
I did. I played the clarinet. It's not the most common instrument to transition from, but yeah. Yeah.
And I'm also curious, I'm sorry to say this, but I don't know anything about the Mandinka.
Yeah, so they're one of about seven, the Mandinka are about one of 7 different ethnic groups in Gambia. They're the predominant ones there. In the other countries where the Kora is from, they're not as predominant. Mandinka is like the street language in Gambia just because most people are Mandinka. English is spoken there a lot though, because Gambia at least was a English colony until 1965. Most of the other countries where the Kora is from were colonized by the French. There's one country, Guinea-Bissau, which was Portuguese. Yeah, this is a Mandinka specific instrument. So, yes.
I have 2 questions. Yes, one is your tuning. Are you to play with other musicians? Are you in C tuning, or so you can perform? Or is there different tunings that you have? And my other question is about your electronics for your pickups that you have hooked up to your instruments. What are you using?
I'm using Fishman pickups for both of them. They're harp/piano pickups.
Okay.
So it's just like a nickel size, and it gets mounted to the inside of the calabash.
Yes.
And then
Is that something you installed yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did. As far as the tuning, it's very similar to Western tuning because it has 7 notes per scale, the progression of the Kora, so it's not chromatic. So you can tune to whatever key you want to, really, as long as it has that 7-note progression. I'm in F major for the most part. There's a few different keys that I can play in. There are 4 traditional tunings with the Kora, and I'm using 2 of them, one on each Kora. One just has a single lowered pitch, so that would be 2 strings. But there are 2 other tunings that I haven't really done much with, and one of them has, I believe, 3 pitches that are lowered a bit, which would be, I think, 7 different strings. And then the other tuning has, I think, 2 lowered pitches, but also 1 raised pitch. So, yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah.
Is there a big following for this kind of music in the Smokies area? It's not bluegrass.
No, I would say the Southeast, generally not. Yeah, it's pretty unknown about. I mean, it's unknown in the U.S. in general, I would say.
So what do you play then?
There's somebody in Oregon who makes them.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I play in a lot of libraries, schools, cultural centers, assisted living facilities. So, yeah.
And what's it again? It's
Kora,
how do you spell it?
K-O-R-A.
Oh, K-R-A.
Yeah. What's that? Can kids learn the songs? Yes, they can. Yeah, in fact, sometimes people are as young as 5 years old when they start playing. And the way that they learn is really interesting because the person teaching, usually the father, will let their kids sit next to them as they're playing for quite some time. It might be a little bit every day. It's usually not forced for the kid to do that. The father usually just allows it to happen whenever they're playing. And based on how much interest the kid shows will determine when the father will hand the Kora over to their kid. Sometimes it might not be for 4 or 5 years after listening for the very first time. It might even be longer in some cases. And usually if someone is under the age of 8, they'll have a miniature-sized Kora built for them with the same number of strings. But if they're older than 8, they'll get a full-sized Kora. Yeah?
Are there always 21 strings and there's no frets, right? So there's
No frets. Yeah, it's all open plucking. You're only using the thumbs and index fingers, so no more, no less. It looks like these fingers are moving. They are, but it's involuntary movement. They're just holding the handlebars. They're preventing the handlebars from falling that way, basically. So that's all they're doing. Yeah, it's the weight of the Kora is sitting in the lap, so these 3 fingers are really not doing much at all. So, yeah. Right. So, yeah, so there's no, no fretting or anything. It's just open.
21 sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes 22. This one has 21 strings. This one has 22. Anytime you have more than 21 strings, they always add an extra bass string, and you can tune them however you want at that point, those extra strings. I've seen a Kora with 24 strings one time, but it's pretty rare. So, yeah. Take one more? Yeah, one more question.
Are the pitches of the strings arranged in a specific order?
As long as you follow the basic practice of a diatonic scale, if you will, you can tune it to whatever you want, but it has to be, in that progression, if you will. So essentially, I'm in F major using all the white keys on the piano. So, yeah. Listen, I wanted to thank you all for coming out. I'm going to play one last song before we wrap up. I want to thank Jessica and the folks here at the library for being able to host me. I do have CDs available in the back. They're $10, and I can take cash, check, even credit card. I can take credit card onto my phone, so come see me if you need to do that. If you want to pay with cash or check, just go to the table that you passed coming in. There's a small clear tub next to the briefcase, not a 5-gallon one, very small. You'll see it. You can put either of those in. There's also an email list on the table. If you sign up for that, I'll let you know the next time I'm coming through. Feel free to take a card home with you, a business card. It has my website on it. It has my performance calendar there and different links that you can go to find out more about the Kora. So, this last song, I'm actually going to roll 2 songs into one, and the first one is called Kurutu Kelifa. It's named after Kelifa Sane. This is the very first song composed in the Kora back in the early 1700s, but the person who it's about lived about 200 years prior to that, and he helped bring the Mendika Empire into the Gambia. The song Jato, which I'll transition into, Jato means lion, the animal, and it's dedicated to the lion because they say if you ever meet a lion in the wilderness, you should take caution. Thanks again so much for coming. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you feel like you've learned something in the process. So thanks.
Thank you, John.